to tell us about Hypotheses.
Hey folks, and it's always a pleasure to follow Ellen, longtime collaborator and friend in the community as well. And I'm actually going to touch back on the H5P if we have time. So I'm calling to you. I'm actually in Colorado, Jonathan, but I'm way over on the other side of the state in Fruta. So I don't think we'll have a chance to meet up, but I'm here hidden away in one of the monasteries that we have over in Western Colorado. I normally come to you from Oregon, but I'm visiting Colorado today. So it's very sunny here. It's very nice. I hope everybody is doing really well wherever you are. I am going to also share my screen. Big surprise. I know how everybody loves a good screen share, right? I also want to get the chat open here because these slides have a lot of links in them, and you're welcome to go ahead and grab them and at any time visit them. It's just a Google presentation, and you can download it and or interact with it online. Follow the links as you will. And so I really appreciate the invitation to be here. Annika and I go way back working in OER in Maryland, as she mentioned. For those of you who are at the very start, really happy to be back with her in another context. And one of the first things I wanted to say is that, you know, Hypotheses is an interesting organization. We're actually a completely open source, mission-driven organization. And one of the fundamental things that's behind what we do is something we call the annotated community. And it's basically the collections of people and institutions that are using social annotation in serious ways. So you can't see any of the logos on the screen because there's now so many that it's gotten to be the point where you can't even read them anymore. So we're going to have to figure out a different way to represent this at some point. But I just like to point out that a big part of our practice is to engage like deeply and authentically with folks in the education community, and you'll see more of that as we go along. And so just in case folks don't know what Hypothesis is, or even what social annotation is, since I've already bandied those words around, I thought I might just start out by reminding us all that annotation itself is like an incredibly ancient practice, right? You know, people have been writing on top of other texts ever since there were texts to write on. And, you know, when it comes to the early practices, the annotations that we add today are pretty much the same kind of things. We're adding notes on top of other texts. They might even be conversations between multiple people if that text is handed around. And so when we move into these days, you know, annotation isn't fundamentally different, but one way that we like to think of it is something that my colleague Jeremy Dean talks about a lot, is the idea of changing a reading from something that one does as a sort of solitary activity into making it become a kind of gathering place or a communal shared space where we can actually come together either synchronously or asynchronously and have a conversation. So here's a quote where Jennifer Howard kind of touched on that idea. And so one of the things that digital annotation enables us to do that analog annotation, like on ancient manuscripts that you might find in a monastery like this, didn't allow, is the idea of bringing in different layers of annotation on top of a text. So one of the affordances that digital gives us, right, is the ability to expose kind of different conversations, if you will, or different layers of conversation at different times to different people, you know, whether those be fully private layers or whether they be public layers. And so one of the things Hypothesis enables is all those capabilities between annotating in a fully public mode so that anyone who visits a particular digital text can see that annotation record and participate in it, to a closed group annotation that you might see in like something like a class, right? Classroom environment where a group of people is having a kind of more private conversation on top of a text, all the way to just a completely private note-taking experience that then is no longer social, you know, just me leaving notes and highlights on top of a digital text. And so that's something that we get with moving to digital that is harder to do in the analog world. And, you know, how does it actually work? Well, when it comes to hypothesis itself, it's pretty straightforward. You're in front of a digital text, you highlight some text, you get the option to annotate it or highlight it. Once you've made a note in the margin that opens up, you can that note can then be the root of a conversation, and we'll see more examples of this. So an annotation can be replied to, and replies can be replied to, and you can have essentially like a threaded discussion forum right there on top of the text. And then, that, like I was saying before, can happen in the context of group activity if you so wanted to. And just as a side note, there's sort of two different big modes of hypothesis annotation. One is out on the open web using an individual account that you can sign up for free at the Hypothesis website. That's pretty fully capable. You can get your individual account. You can even create individual groups. You can invite individual private groups, sorry. You can invite other users to join you, and you can annotate privately. So it's pretty full featured, but it does have the issue that everybody has to go sign up for an account and then come together, and there's a lot of orchestration that needs to happen around having people annotate together that way. We have another sort of mode of annotation where it's integrated into a learning management system. So a lot of those schools that we were showing in the annotated community have hypothesis integrated into their learning management systems. And that means that single sign-on students or faculty don't need to go create other accounts. The rosters for each class group in an LMS automatically become a private group that can annotate together privately as a group in over a text. There's things like gradebook integration, and this is something that we offer for all the what they call the LTI compatible learning management systems. So I just wanted to make it clear that there are sort of these two realms, and I know folks like Jonathan Poritz, who's here, have spent a lot of time out annotating in the individual public side of things, but there's also this LMS world where you can annotate. And I just wanted to spend just a couple minutes just talking about how annotation can specifically impact teaching and learning. So, I mean, there are a lot of different ways a human being could use digital annotation. You could imagine a group of lawyers annotating a document together, or a group of journalists or something. But when it comes to teaching and learning, there's a couple of kind of key affordances that we think digital social annotation brings forward. And one of those is this idea of making reading active. And so if you think about, the way that one can read, whether it's digital or analog, doesn't really matter, right? You can just sort of let the words kind of pass over your eyes and maybe through your mind a little bit, but you're not really stopping to engage with the text. With the ability to add a note right there into the text, it enables you to sort of activate your reading. And if you've made a connection to an idea, another text, another human being, and you want to surface that in the text, you can make a record for it right there in the text. And so it enables you to not only be active in your reading, but to make the trail of your activity visible. And that's the second affordance that digital social annotation brings, is this idea of leaving kind of a breadcrumb trail of your reading, right? You have your interaction with the reading through the text. And one of the main things that does in the teaching and learning environment is it gives faculty members and teachers an ability to see how students are engaging with the reading. First of all, are they engaging with the reading? Are they leaving a breadcrumb trail? And if so, what are they saying? Are they asking questions? Are they having troubles with parts? Are they having conversations around certain parts? And so that visibility can be a powerful tool. And then finally, the social element of it, right? Moving away reading from that solitary act into something we do together as a group and leave a record of in the text itself. And there's a couple of different kind of ways that you can just sort of enact these general capabilities that come about. And so, one of the kind of fundamental purposes of bringing a text into the social annotation world is to move that text into a communal space, right? And so we've talked about that a little bit. Another one is you can use annotation as a way to kick off a sort of interaction for the students and the teachers in a class, so that they are themselves having discussions about about the class itself in kind of a metacognitive way. And one practice that a lot of people use for that is to have students annotate the syllabus. There's a link here to Remy Collier's work on annotating the syllabus, which can be really valuable, because not only does it give people a way to interact with the syllabus and start to ask questions with that and make the syllabus more interactive, but it also introduces everyone in the class to the idea of annotating together on a text right at the beginning of the class. Another thing that Jeremy also talks about is, regardless of whether you have a plan for it or not, just make the readings annotation enabled so that if the students want to have a conversation in the text, they can, right? There's not going to be any blockage to them doing that. Don't stand in their way, but you don't necessarily need to direct it either. Just as a starting mode, introduce them to the fact that there's a margin there to write in and let them go. On a much more directive level, one can also guide students through the reading, right? A teacher can leave annotations along the way through reading that ask students questions or highlight certain aspects of the text that they want them to focus on and so forth. And so there can be these kind of signposts along the way that you could use annotation in a much more structured way to guide students to the reading. And then, maybe the last kind of fundamental practice is just this idea of moving the kind of discussion that you might have around a seminar table to the margin of the text itself, which can be so useful, especially when you're working with students or in a class environment that's maybe not always able to meet face-to-face around a table in that same way. So just wanted to check, Annika, how I'm doing on time myself. I think I have about 10 more minutes or so, right?
Yep, you have about 12.
Cool. Well, I'm done kind of blathering at you. And now I just wanted to entice you with a couple of treats. And so first I thought that it might be fun to just go look at a work that had been heavily annotated in Hypothesis. So I'm just going to move some of these Zoom windows out of my way here. Because I'm traveling, I don't have all my giant monitors to look at, but so as you can see, this is a poem, Langston Hughes, and it has over 80 annotations on it. And you can see it's not a very long text, and it has a kind of density of highlighting on it. And so anywhere I click into this highlighting is going to bring up the annotations that are linked specifically to that highlighted area. And this is one of the things to think about, right? If you have a very short text and a lot of people annotating it, the conversation can almost get too dense, right? So that's something to think about, and something that we made possible in the LMS integration. We support groups and sections capabilities so that you can bring students into smaller groups to annotate a text and make it a little less noisy. And just so you know, you can also have a clean read. Like if I don't want to see all the highlighting and I want to have a clean read through it first, I could click on this little eyeball and turn off the highlighting, close that margin, that sidebar, get it out of my way, and just read the text sort of clean first. And then at any point, I can bring the annotations back alive and the highlighting back alive. I can also make the annotation sidebar, wider or more narrow as we're going through it. And so, there's a link to this poem in the slide deck that I shared. And this was a public conversation on top of this poem. It was actually had in the context of another event. And so it gives you an example of the kind of thing that can happen when a group of people descend on a text and annotate together. And you're welcome to annotate there as well. And then I had another example here too. So this is a slightly more scholarly text. It happens to be published in Press Books, but that's sort of beside the point, because Hypothesis can sit on top of digital texts of all different kinds. But you can see this is a much longer text, right? And it has fewer annotations on it overall, but also those annotations are more spread out through this longer document, right? So again, this is a text that you yourself could annotate and dive into on the subject of kind of a pedagogical subject. And if I wanted to add my own annotation, right, all I need to do is, again, highlight, start an annotation, and there I have what's essentially like a little mini web page where I can put text, links, images, links to videos, and even links to H5P interactives, which is one of the things I wanted to come back to, and I'll do that again in just a second. A couple of other kind of little treats that I wanted you to know about. One is we have this, it's kind of like a podcast, but with video. It's a show we call Liquid Margins, where we invite educators, mostly folks from this annotate ed community, to come talk about their use of social annotation in different contexts, different disciplines, different institutional, environments and things like that. There's a link to the show in there, and you can go back and see you can review the whole past history of all the episodes that have come before, and join us for future episodes that are upcoming. We also have some other events that we do to help people learn about hypothesis. I wanted to draw attention really quickly to a sort of new thing that we started last year, where we inaugurated a scholar in residence program with our first scholar in residence, another Coloradan, Dr. Rami Kalir from UC Denver, and he has been leading a program where we collaborate with, again, schools in the annotated community to research, what does social annotation do for us in teaching and learning, right? What kinds of outcomes are we seeing when people start to use social annotation in classes of different kinds? And one of the first big projects that's happening there is a very large-scale research project on social annotation in the context of English and composition with Indiana University. And there's a link here that you can follow to read more about that. The data, it ran for the first time last spring semester, and so the data for that is starting to roll in. It will generate some formal peer-reviewed publications, as well as there's already some informal blog posts that we published about that research. So we're starting to get into some really interesting ideas about what happens when thousands of students annotate hundreds of texts, and make 25,000 annotations across them over the course of a term. And then the last thing I wanted to say was to turn once more back to H5P. And we already mentioned Pressbook Seal Wagstaff's name, or Alan did. Another great person who would probably be here today if things were a little bit different. And when he was still at Wisconsin, Steele did a really interesting experiment that we're hoping to be able to roll out to everyone, where he actually made it possible in the Wisconsin context. He had to do a lot of custom work to make this happen, so that basically, if you were a instructor, you could go to a text, and in this case, they happen to be texts that were in Pressbooks, but again, it wouldn't matter so much what they were. You could highlight something to create a hypothesis annotation, but in that hypothesis annotation, you would actually put an H5P interactive. And so to me, this is maybe one of the most powerful sounding kind of learning affordances that I could imagine, where basically anybody, any instructor, any student even, can basically come to a text and add interactivity to that at will by using this combination of the hypothesis margin and the H5P interactivity working together. The only thing standing in the way of this being available to everyone right now is there's some security concerns that we need to work out at hypothesis to make it okay for H5P links to just be embedded and show up in the annotations, no problem. The same way that like YouTube videos and Vimeo and Flipgrids do already. We just need to make that possible for H5P, and then it will be in there. And that's the end of my prepared remarks. And so I'll stop that slide and see if there are questions or other interactivity that people want to get into in the chat. I see I've stunned everybody into total silence.
Thank you so much, Nate. Jonathan's wondering if you know of any examples of STEM artifacts. I think we often see annotation used in more of a literary context. So he's wondering if you have happen to know of any good STEM ones.
Yeah, so I will say this, Jonathan, obviously the roots of annotation with hypothesis at least were heavily embedded in, the humanities, the English composition especially, then spread out into history and things like that. But there's increasingly more and more use across STEM. We see it just in the number of classes that are spawned and being run in hypothesis now. So two things about resources. One is, because this has ramped up recently, we ourselves haven't done as good a job as we can do collecting STEM resources. But two things. One of your fellow educators just started a public Slack for STEM educators interested in annotating, social annotation. I will find the link for that for you, and I can send it to you separately if I can't give it to you right now. And the other is that if I would, get off my monastery seat here and get to work, we are going to unveil a collection of resources for social annotation that would be, searchable and browsable by discipline. And so that would be an area where we could finally do a good job of collecting and servicing these artifacts that you're interested in talking about. We call it, again, we're calling it the liquid margins collection, since we call everything liquid margins by default. So yeah, I see. Alan's helpfully added that. Yes, and one of the other great things you can put into annotation is LaTeX code. So you can definitely put annotations equations into annotations. You can also put any language or character set into an annotation. You can actually annotate on top of any language or character set too. There's some trickinesses with vertical languages or and some of the right to left languages, but the annotations themselves are completely available to work in any language. Yeah, FETs, that's a good question, Kathy. Yeah, theoretically, anything, the annotations are like little mini web pages, right? Where you can put almost anything, and really the only thing that holds it back from truly being anything is security. And so it isn't open now for you to just throw your own JavaScript in an annotation, right? Because that would be a potential security hole. And that's been the holdup on H5P, is we need to make sure that that could go securely. But theoretically, there's no reason why a FET couldn't happen as well, a FET sim, if that's the right word. And so we should talk about that more. I know I'm getting close to the end of my time. Yes, just to follow up, Jonathan, the display layer of the LaTeX in the Hypothesis sidebar is MathJax. We don't have a custom equation editing function, so you have to put raw LaTeX in, but you get nice MathJax out.
Yes, we learned all about that at our last meeting.
Awesome. You guys are way ahead of me then. You know more about it than I do. I'm sure Jonathan and Ellen do.
Yeah, we had a lot of geeking out over math things and code.
Yeah. I think that's one of the beauties, is you can geek out into the deepest levels of LaTeX, but you can also, get really visual or just focus on, meanings and layers that have nothing to do with the technology, just with like voice or video annotations, right? That go beyond the tech and the words, and really reach out into other kind of multimodal dimensions.
Yeah, I've seen some nice applications, mainly in humanities and language learning, where there's a text and then you can listen to a file of someone speaking the text, or you could watch a video that's related to the text, and it's all like right there on that same page, right? So it's like really nice use of that. Yeah,
and it's a great thing to have students do too, right? Like, if I were a foreign language teacher, give someone a foreign language text and say, okay, let's decorate this foreign language text with resources that may be sound or video or images that help us understand this text that's in a language that's maybe not our first.
Great. Any other questions for Nate?
Again, I'll put the link to my slides back in the chat there in case anybody missed it the first time around.
Thank you, Nate. That was great.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for having me.
Also for making your slides so easily accessible. We appreciate that.